And today's discussion is one I have been looking forward to for a long time. And I will tell you, it's one that I've been searching for a resource for a long time, because on these discussions, most of the attorneys that we feature and we've introduced you to are elder law and estate planning attorneys. These are attorneys that can help you, review those life plan community contracts. They can help you with probate, your estate planning, advanced, medical powers of attorneys, all of these topics that we discuss on a regular basis. Now, for a lot of reasons, these attorneys are not the best attorneys to handle a nursing home abuse case or an abuse case in a senior living community or hospital or setting like that. And until recently, I did not have an attorney in that area crossing my path. And then I met Joe Musso, and the first thing I said to him was, you got to come on this discussion, because I know we get a lot of questions in this area. And so, Joe, I am really charged up to have you on today. And I know that this can be a touchy subject, and I'm really excited to dive into this. But before we do that, let's get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led to your career in this area.
I've been a nursing home abuse and neglect attorney for 25 years this January. And I always say whenever I speak, and if you Google Joe Musso and nursing home, you're going to see videos that go back years and years. And I've been talking about this problem for a quarter of a century now. It's hard to believe. But I always kind of, in every one of those conversations, end up telling the story about how I wish I had a better origin story, right? Like, I wish a lot of my colleagues that do this work, and there's not a lot of us, which is why you probably had such a hard time finding me, that most of them have a story. They have a loved one who was neglected, or they saw a friend and they came in and saw this horrible thing. My origin story is that I was looking for a job. I had been working at a personal injury firm, and the owner was very successful, and he had a home in Florida and a home in New Jersey, and he summered in New Jersey and he wintered in Florida, and he came back one fall and said, "Hey, law clerk, if you'd like a job here, there's this stuff going on in Florida. They're suing nursing homes for abusing the elderly, and they've been pretty successful down there." And being the kind of visionary that Craig Arenberg, who was the founder of the firm, the first firm I worked at, Arenberg and Kauser, he said, "Look, I don't think this is going to be in just Florida in the next 50 years. I think this is going to be all over the country, because I think there's probably a big problem, and our society is aging, and these nursing homes are running on Medicare and Medicaid payments, which are essentially a prospective payment system. So the only way they can make a profit is to cut their overhead. And I think the number one overhead they have is staff." And that was 25 years ago, and he was absolutely right. So I just wanted a job. Now, you don't stay in this job that long, though, without the stories. And certainly being a part of representing families of abuse and neglect victims for 25 years has been a real privilege, a real honor, a really tough way to make a living in a lot of ways. But certainly it's a very rewarding area of law that I do.
Wow. Well, all right. Well, let's I can't think of anybody better to dive into this topic. And I think first off, when we talk about, and we build this as a discussion on nursing home abuse, but does this expands beyond just the licensed nursing home? It could be any kind of facility, or you probably have represented clients that are receiving home care. Am I correct?
Sure. Yes. So I'm a civil attorney. So just for any of your listeners who don't know the difference, I'm not a criminal lawyer. I can't put anyone in jail for abuse. Although many of my cases end up involving criminal acts, I can't prosecute either institutions or individuals for crimes because I'm not a part of the state, right? I hold nursing homes, home health agencies, group homes, even individual caretakers sometimes. I hold them accountable financially for the harm that they cause to a resident or to an elderly person. So I do work in home health care. I do bring claims against assisted living facilities, continuing care, retirement communities, anywhere. And really, this is the best way to think about it. Anytime an elderly person, or it's not always elderly people. I mean, I have a case right now where I'm representing a 28-year-old who had significant disabilities, but she was in a nursing home, right? So it's not, I shouldn't say it's just elderly, but 98% of them are elderly folks. And anytime that the elderly person at issue, the resident, the person who's involved, the patient, cannot do something for themselves that if left undone will cause them harm, and they're paying someone else to do that for them. That is the best way to think about when I get involved, because ultimately we think about abuse and we think about the horrible cases, the things, and putting cigarettes out on residents and rapes, and I have those. I have done, unfortunately, dozens of rape cases, dozens of beating cases, the stuff you think of when you hear nursing home abuse that is horrifying, right? But the vast majority of the work I do over my 25 years, I'd say 95% or more of the work I do is actually failure to deliver the care that they were supposed to give, leading to something. So your listeners might think of it better as abuse and neglect. This is neglect. And now in my world, if you neglect somebody sufficiently that they starve to death, if you neglect somebody sufficiently that they get outside and freeze to death, if you neglect somebody and they develop a stage 4 pressure ulcer down to the bone, it's abuse in my world and in my career. That's abuse. So abuse can be passive or it can be active. So it's not just rapes and beatings. In fact, most of the time it's you took somebody, you knew what they needed, you told their family and them that you would do it, and then you didn't do it. And as a result, the negative thing that the resident was trying to avoid occurred.
Wow. Well, that really, I thought was a very good description to help me kind of decipher the abuse and neglect. And one of the things that you brought up there is family. And, I imagine that, for somebody to take the steps for you to take on their case, more than likely they have a family. And one of the scary things to think about is that the amount of people that are in care setting that don't have loved ones caring for them or looking out after them, and that just makes abuse and neglect that much easier.
One of the things I talk to a lot of clients about that can be challenging is that someone comes to me and they believe their loved one was abused or neglected in a facility that they place their trust in, right? And often, it's very rarely the client, the resident that's calling me, right? It's very often their kids, their family. And the sad reality of my work is that litigation against nursing homes can take 2 to 5 years. Very often, 98% of the time, my client's dead, either at the time that I'm being called or they pass away sometime during the litigation. I'm really representing, I always consider myself, of course, representing the resident, but I'm always hired almost exclusively by the family. And the first thing that happens when someone comes to me is that they're looking for answers for how they got betrayed, right? For a lot of my clients, they didn't know how to pick a nursing home, right? They didn't know, most of them don't know that there's a CMS nursing home compare website that they can go to and check the stars and check the staffing and look at the last 3 inspections. A lot of those families, we think about, it's funny, Steve, we think about the way people choose nursing homes, and we've got this romanticized idea that the brothers and sisters sit around and they say, hey, it's time for mom to maybe go into a facility because, she's really getting forgetful and she left the oven on the other day and something bad could have happened. And certainly that happens. But the vast majority of the time, the way this happens is mom or dad has a stroke or some kind of fall or problem, ends up in a hospital. And then while at the hospital says, look, it's not safe for them to go home yet. They need rehabilitation, or maybe they don't belong in an independent setting anymore. And by the way, we're discharging mom tonight at 4:30 or this afternoon at 4:30, and it's noon. And now, here are the two facilities that have an open bed. Which one do you want? And so these families aren't touring the facility typically in a lot of my situations. Assisted living, maybe more, but with nursing homes, oftentimes it's a social worker at the hospital who says, hey, where do you want the ambulance to drop your mom off? Here are the two places that'll accept either your insurance or Medicare and have an open bed this afternoon within 20 miles of your home. Mm-hmm. There's no time to go vet the place. And then they get there and they start seeing things that are troubling. They smell things that are troubling. They see things that are troubling. But now they got to think about, where am I going to, am I going to take mom out? She's been here for 2 weeks. She's comfortable. She's finally understanding her environment. Her confusion has subsided. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And it just keeps on going. And when something horrible happens, like the stuff that I'm called about, these families are crushed with guilt. Why didn't I look more? Why didn't I do more research? Why didn't I ask questions? Why didn't I get her out there earlier? I mean, the motto of my law firm, and this has been the motto of my old firm, I just recently started my own firm. I was at a large local firm for 15 years with, big firm that everyone here would know. But the saying's always been the same. We turn victims into victors. We close that guilt off. And what we're truly trying to do is get families to sleep at night so that they can say, it wasn't your fault this happened. And my clients almost exclusively come to me and say, it's not about the money, because I'm always sharing with them the reality that our law is just not great. It's like, I think I told you before we started today, there's easier ways to make a living as a lawyer than suing nursing homes who have medical malpractice defense firms defending them, have a complicated regulatory pattern. There's Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, every kind of lien involved in your case. Oh, and I'm representing somebody that was so sick, vulnerable, and frail at the time that this happened, before the thing I'm suing about, that they needed 24/7 care in a facility. That's just not an easy way to make a living, right? But
you gotta love it.
It's important. It's really important work. And I tell all my clients, because my clients a lot of times are very angry, and understandably so, and they want to shut the place down. And I start talking to them about how the reality is there's no lost wages. They've outlived their actuarial life expectancy. And the laws in Virginia, Maryland, and DC, where I practice primarily, are not great. Like DC, for example, their wrongful death statute basically measures damages on the financial dependence people had on the person who died. Well, if you kill me, my wife and kids can bring a big lawsuit because, I'm a high wage earner and I'm 49 years old, and my life's value in the District of Columbia for wrongful death is my income projected out until I retire. But do that with a 90-year-old in a nursing home. And I can tell you, my fight has often been trying to convince judges and juries and legislatures and everyone who will listen that if we don't start valuing our elderly by putting value on their life in a wrongful death case, there's no reason why a lot of institutions that are pressured by tough reimbursement schemes and trying to make a profit are not going to figure in the lawsuit as part of the cost. And that's what my ultimate goal of doing this work is. And that's what I tell my clients. Ultimately, the purpose of this work, while no single case, brings down a nursing home, it's important to me, and my legacy will ultimately be that somebody, and we say this in my law firm too, somebody I will never meet, somebody I will never know, somebody will never know me, will sleep better and have a little bit more dignity and maybe have a little more staffing in their facility because of the work that we did, because somebody's going to say, I'd rather put that extra nurse on the night shift on Saturday night, even though there's no surveyor there that night, because someone like Joe might sue us if someone gets hurt and we don't have that person on there. And it's cheaper to put the nurse on than to deal with these lawsuits. That's the goal of basically not just me, but everyone who does the work that I do.
Yeah, no, this is great. Now, I can tell you, like I've been doing this for 30 years, so I get lots of calls from people that feel like their mom or loved one was abused or neglected. And I because I said at the beginning of this, I didn't know you and I didn't know any attorneys in this space, but I always start with Adult Protective Services and the long-term care ombudsman.
Excellent.
Tell us a little bit about like how does this whole infrastructure work, and if somebody does feel like they know someone out there that might be having difficulty, what should they do? I also, before you answer this question, I also want to add, and I think you would agree too, is that as in every single business that's out there, there are good and bad players, and I've had the good fortune to see a lot of really wonderful places, and there's a lot of innovation in this space now that and one of my heroes is Dr. Bill Thomas, who bills himself as a nursing home abolitionist, and his main goal is this small house model, because I think the thing that you've been addressing is staffing is really the key difference, not real estate, it's staffing.
So you've hit on so many important things there. I want to make sure I can remember them all. Please just kick me if I forget one. But
APS and ombudsman and how you get started and all that stuff. Yeah.
So the first thing is I'm gonna start on the back end. So first of all, people assume something about me that's really not true. A lot of people assume that I hate nursing homes, or that I dislike nurses, or that I don't appreciate what nurses do. And honestly, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, the reality is we need nursing homes. We need assisted living facilities. Now, I'm with you. I like the idea of casting a vision for, smaller places, more attention, better staffing, better reimbursement. I'm not against nursing homes making money, assisted living facilities making money. And there are some, of course, there are wonderful facilities out there. And the reality is, the overwhelming majority of the time, people go into these facilities and they either get better and go home, or their final days are more dignified and safer than they would have been had they been at home on their own. So I don't hate the industry. I'm not mad at any of them. I don't want to say that I'll never go into one. I mean, I know a lot of people are scared of these kinds of facilities, but for the most part, they're really great. And here's the other thing. It's not the nurses and the staff that I'm typically chasing down. I mean, I've been doing it 25 years, Steve, and I can tell you, I can count on at least maybe two hands now that it's 25 years instead of one hand, but two hands still, not very much for 25 years. The number of nurses or aides that I sat across from in a deposition or a trial and thought, this is a really nasty person. This is somebody who really was horrible and wanted to hurt people. You don't go into nursing. You don't go into becoming a certified nurse aide. You don't go into home health care because you want to harm the elderly, right? My lawsuits are about money. And they're not just about money in the sense of that's what we get. I believe that nursing home neglect and abuse specifically, and I think it does filter down to other types of facilities, but my primary area in nursing homes is about financial decisions made at a corporate level for some facilities. And you know what these facilities are because you can look back at their last 3 ratings and see that their staffing level has been down for 10 years. It's a business model for them. And when you come across that, Yeah, that makes me mad. That's what I'm chasing down, because the victims in those cases are not just the residents, it's the staff too. I get in depositions with staff members and they start telling me things like, I did everything I could, there just wasn't enough time. There just wasn't enough people. I was by myself with 35 residents. They had no chance. And absolutely, the other part of this triangle is the family, because these families come to me, and most of my families are very informed, they're very involved. I told you, I think before we started, that I don't take what we call the warehouse case, which is someone comes to me and says, I dropped mom off in a nursing home 5 years ago, then moved to the West Coast and never followed up. And then when I finally was told that she died, someone told me she had a bed sore on her foot and I want to sue over it. I don't do that. I represent families that were involved, that were advocates, that were trying to be a part of things. But they can't do that stuff alone. Advocating by yourself, particularly for the sandwich generation, which, the generation that's raising children on one end and then trying to take care of mom and dad on the other while dealing with their marriage and their job and everything else, they need help, they need resources. And so whether it's contacting lawyers like me to ask questions about, hey, this is what's happening. I don't turn people away if they call me and they don't have a case and they just say, hey, look, this is the problem I'm having. I'm happy to tell them what I think about that. But ombudsmen, adult protective services, these agencies, it is critical that that those resources are available, which is why I'm so happy for people like you, Steve, who are doing things like this every week or so, telling the world, hey, look, these resources are out there. Same thing with the elder lawyers and the estate planners and all those lawyers and people that you give information to all the time, because I'll give you another example of the kind of neglect and abuse that kind of flies under the radar, and it's forced pre-dispute arbitration clauses. It's mom goes into a nursing home or assisted living facility, and the hospital, the ambulance wheels her into the facility and she's going to go to her room, and the daughter's sitting there with some admission intake coordinator, and they're having her sign a pre-dispute binding arbitration agreement that cuts off the resident's ability to go to court if their mom is abused or neglected, and the families, if they kill that resident, the family's ability to sue for wrongful death is limited by that document. And of course, the daughter's not reading this 20-page boilerplate arbitration agreement. They're just signing it so they can go get their mom and set up a room and make sure she's comfortable. And then they get shocked to find out, after mom got killed by negligence, that they waived their right to the civil justice system. And elder lawyers who do power of attorneys and guardianships and all of that are in a unique position ahead of time to warn those families about that. And so I work with, I talk to elder lawyers all the time, and I say, it would be so awesome if you, while you're doing a power of attorney, would expressly ask the person, hey, do you want your power of attorney to be able to enter into pre-dispute arbitration clauses where you waive all of your rights to the justice system? Because if you take that out, then they can't, doesn't matter what they sign, right? So there's just a lot of things to it. But yeah, APS, licensing agencies that, like the Office of Healthcare Quality in Maryland, the Virginia Department of Health Office of Licensure in Virginia, these agencies are required by law to investigate any complaints of negligence or neglect or abuse. Now, sometimes they can take, a year and a half to do it, but they do it, and they have to do it. And it matters. So if you don't know that exists, you're advocating with one arm behind your back. If you don't know that you can call an ombudsman who knows the system, knows the people, and can come in and explain things to you. A lot of times people call me and they're just confused. Mom's not doing well, and they're assuming there's a neglect or an abuse or something. Sometimes it just helps to have another set of eyeballs to go, look, here's the situation, here's what's really happening. And like you said, Steve, for every 100 calls I get, 3 of them are cases I would take. 97 of them are sad stories and people who are not doing well in the nursing home, but it's not the nursing homes abusing them or neglecting them. The aging process sucks. The end of life sucks. And if you're in hospice, sometimes it's a crappy situation and it's nobody's fault. And that I'm happy to talk to people that are confused about whether or not it was neglect or not, because sometimes you find that it was.
Mhm.
But sometimes my clients, and I'm sure you've come across this, they just don't know where to turn for answers. They don't even know who to ask. But yeah, APS and licensure units and lawyers like me and elder lawyers.
And I think, if you suspect an issue, going to ombudsman and APS is a good first step, because it's public record, so that down the road, if you end up calling somebody like Joe,
Right.
that helps make the case. But we're starting to get a bunch of questions. I knew this was going to happen.
Fire away.
So let's see. The first one is, why don't the courts appoint an ombudsman when a guardian is appointed to a resident with Alzheimer's? Do you understand that question? Why don't the courts appoint an ombudsman when a guardian is appointed to a resident with Alzheimer's?
I have a sense of that question. I don't know the answer to that other than my guess, which would be that's a lot of ombudsmen assigned to a lot of people. I mean, this is something that, I read something the other day that said that our population over 65 went up by 30% in the last 5 years, our country. I mean, that's staggering. And if you think about it, it's just continuing. Our country is aging very rapidly, and we're learning to live longer, and in some cases live sicker. And the idea that every single person who gets guardian, while awesome, I make the same argument all the time when I'm taking a deposition of an administrator who denies that staffing levels impact care, which is ridiculous, right? Of course it does. I give them the example of, well, why don't you just have a nurse and 2 aides for every patient? And they go, well, because we couldn't. Well, certainly the care would be better, wouldn't it? And they go, yeah. And so why don't you do it? Well, because we'd go broke in a couple of weeks. And so it really is a struggle of resources versus reality. And the truth is, I just don't think there's enough ombudsmen out there. But I love the idea. I mean, anything that gets more eyeballs on it. But here's the thing, if the guardian knows that they can always reach out to the ombudsman's office, it's kind of the same thing. I mean, an ombudsman wouldn't necessarily need to be appointed at the time a guardian is appointed if the guardian understood their fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the person that they're guarding, that they're being guardian for, and that they're aware that there's an ombudsman program and that they can contact them, right?
Great. Okay, let's see. Here's a real life question, and I'm not going to say the person's name, but so she says, my mother is in a memory care unit of a large senior residential community. We are concerned about some of the issues, but mainly staffing levels. I was told that even though many memory care residents need a lot of care, there are no official standards because it isn't considered a nursing home. Can you touch on who regulates senior facilities and what is legally considered a nursing home?
Okay. Yes, I can do that. The agency that regulates nursing homes is typically the Department of Social Services. Okay, so it's different because the the Department of Health is what regulates nursing homes. Nursing homes are skilled nursing facilities. They're set up under federal regulations and Medicare regulations. Sometimes they're referred to as OBRA 87, which is the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1987. And you can look up any of the regulations governing nursing homes at 42 CFR 483. It's an entire list of the regulations. You'll be shocked at how detailed these regulations are. I mean, everything from how you care plan, do assessments, nutrition, everything is in these regulations. Assisted living facility regulations just are not as comprehensive. They're not as strong. They don't have as many teeth. And a lot of that is because assisted living facilities typically are not accepting Medicare. So the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services that promulgate a lot of these regulations federally for the nursing homes, it's tied to the reimbursement that Medicare is giving. Assisted living facilities are typically accepting long-term care insurance, certain types of other insurance, and then private pay. The big problem you have, in my experience with the assisted living facilities, is actually wrongful retention, is that they take a resident who they are capable of handling when they come in, but that resident deteriorates to the point that they need skilled nursing 24/7 care in a facility, but they're private pay. So they're getting a lot of money, every month for this resident, and they try to stretch it a couple more months to get a couple more payments, right? And that resident really needed to be discharged early. That's called wrongful retention.
Yeah.
But with regard to the specific question you're asking, skilled nursing facilities have very specific regulations that are tied to CMS regulations, and assisted living facilities are much more loose about the regulations of what it is that they do. And that's why they have those different levels of care. Now, there are regulations that govern assisted living facilities, but there is no minimum staffing standard, for example, in a memory care unit for assisted living. And by the way, there is no minimum staffing level. Again, depends on where you are. I mean, Maryland has one that's a basis, but basically the law says for any jurisdiction that you have to staff the facility sufficient to meet all the needs of the residents. And so that's a huge part of the fight in every one of my cases is, did you staff the place to meet all the needs of the residents? And it's a function of how well are the residents being taken care of. If you are having problems in a memory care unit where everything seems to be going okay, but you don't like the ratios of staff, my advice to you really quickly, and I know you've got other people you want that have questions, but just to give this person something to grab onto. You may already be doing this. Know who you're talking to, get the names. If they're not wearing a name tag, ask them for the names. Who am I talking to? Who's taking care of my mom? Who's your boss? Nicely. You don't have to be nasty, right? I always say, be nice until it's time not to be nice, right? Stay nice. You get more flies with honey than vinegar. People sometimes go in and start thinking advocacy is yelling at everybody. That's not what I'm saying. Be nice until you have to not be nice, but demonstrate that you know what's going on. You know everything about your mom's medications. You insist on being told when there's any changes. If there's a care plan conference or an ISP conference, you show up. If you can't show up, you have it rescheduled until you can. You're asking the right questions. You're visiting often, and you're rotating your visitations. You don't want to. This is a world of limited resources. As a person who's asking the question, it's limited resources, and I hate this advice because it's a painful reality. But here's the truth: the squeaky wheel gets the oil. If there are two people and they do not have enough staff to take care of both of them, and one has family members who could come at any time, will know my name, will know my boss's name, will know about APS, will know about the ombudsman system, will know the licensing agency that governs my job, because it's a job to them, okay? It's a business to the owner, it's a job to the staff, and it's your loved one, right? But it's a job to them. So think about it from their perspective. Who am I going to take care of? This one that could visit me at any time, show up in the middle of the night, perhaps, or this one who hasn't visited in 6 months and hasn't asked me a question about how dad's doing. They're going to choose your resident if you're that guy. So be the squeaky wheel.
No, great advice. And I give people similar advice on a regular basis is that, really when you're searching for a place, try to find the place that's most convenient for you to become part of that community. I think a lot of times I draw the comparison to how we get involved with our kids' school. And I'll oftentimes say, did you have kids? Well, I want you to think about this as getting involved in the community that mom is at, the same way that you join the PTA and you got to know people and you're there. Can make a big difference and avoid some of these problems that we're talking about today. Okay, let me get back to some of these questions here. Let's see. Gary says the Kaiser Family Foundation reports that 70% of nursing homes are now for-profit, yet their marketing materials tout compassion and care associated with service organizations. Tips and resources to help the buyer beware. And again, I'm interested in Joe's response to this, but also just recognize, folks, that there are good and bad situations out there, and personally, throwing a blanket over for-profit versus nonprofit could be a slippery slope. But I totally hear what you're saying there, Gary. But Joe, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Gary, I'll tell you some of the, it's a great question. And I can't tell you how often I am in a deposition where I've got the administrator of a facility or the owner of a facility or the governing body of a facility in front of me. And I'm saying, let's pull up your website. And I pull up their website and I say, your values are compassion and love, and you promise to take care of this resident. And it says right here, like they're like they're your family. And then I show them, I'm going to share a photograph with you really quick, Steve. But I will warn your viewers, this is a,
Yeah, and Joe shared this with me earlier, and I said, look, I don't mind that you share this because
right.
it
I want to
makes
show you the
reality,
reality of this, but
get ready to turn your head because I
yeah.
kind of had to take a second.
If you got a weak stomach, you can turn your head now before I share this with you. But I wanted to give you an idea of what we're talking about. When I'm asking an administrator who says I treat them like my family, I'll ask, is this how you treat your family? That is a stage 4 pressure. That's a stage 4 necrotic pressure ulcer. This is 75% of the work I do are pressure ulcer cases. That one led to the tragic death of a woman who was driving and doing all sorts of tasks on her own before she accidentally took too much of a medication, got a little bit loopy, ended up in the hospital, and then got weak. And so they sent her to this place for 30 days of rehab before she was going to go home. And she developed that bed sore and ultimately died from an infected wound that went into her bones. But Gary, getting back to your question, I have handled many cases against nonprofits, and sometimes they can be the worst offenders. And I have seen for-profit facilities that have done a great job. It is true that I believe profit motive is ultimately what causes understaffing, and understaffing is what causes neglect. So your overarching theme is right. But in my experience, skillful business people can create nonprofits and still care about profits. I could spend an hour talking to you about a concept called related entity transactions, where a nonprofit nursing home also happens to own multiple profit real estate investment trusts and management companies and laundromats and all these services that are for-profit companies that contract with that nonprofit nursing home they own. And all of a sudden, a real estate investment trust that the owner of the nonprofit has is getting paid $300,000 a year in rent on a building that the same guy owns. And it's just moving money around so that the nursing home looks broke. So I would really warn against choosing a nursing home based solely on, is it profit or nonprofit? It really, if you are looking at a nursing home, start at the CMS Nursing Home Compare website. Go into Google, right? CMS Nursing Home
I
Compare.
dropped it into chat.
Oh, good. It'll come right up and you can put in the specific nursing home and you will get a really good snapshot of their staffing, their last 3 health inspections. Unfortunately, they don't have this for assisted living facilities or memory care units, but it is great with regard to nursing homes. And if you're looking at a nursing home and you see that it's got a 1-star staffing level for 5 years in a row, that's a problem, because if you're the owner of that facility, don't you notice after 2 years that you've got a 1-star staffing? At some point, it becomes acceptance of a 1-star staffing level, right? Great question, but be careful about that nonprofit thing, because it can be set up in a tricky way where some of the worst offenders choose nonprofit vehicles to argue that they have no money and they're a charity when people like me sue them.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's see. Okay, Robin asked, I remember when you said this, but I don't forget it. She says, I'm sorry, I missed the percentage of growth in the US elderly population.
I just read this, so you're quoting me. I could be off a little. I read it in an article. I obviously am reading a lot of things about the aging of our country, especially with regard to a lot of the work I had done over the last couple of years with COVID and nursing homes. I had testified in front of the Virginia State Legislature and a lot of different places about the way COVID kind of exposed some of the staffing problems that I already knew existed in these facilities. And kind of the whole world got to see essentially a test for those nursing homes. And in some of the articles I read, I saw one stat that said, in the last 5 years, our population over 65 has increased by 30%. I mean, a third of our population crossed the 65 barrier in the last 5 years. And that's just staggering to me. And it shouldn't be, because, you know, lawyers are always competing for cases, right? If you say, hey, I have a car accident case, you know, it's like piranha. A million lawyers would be, oh, I'll handle it. But you go and say, I have a nursing home abuse case, and me and about 3 other lawyers that I've probably trained or created as my former associates that are now running nursing home units outside of me, will raise their hand as doing it. And there's more cases than there are lawyers who can handle them. That's terrifying.
Yeah, that is. Okay, so let's, someone asks, does it help to contact ombudsmen if someone has passed away so that they are aware of the neglect?
So yes, although in my experience, if someone has passed away and you believe they were neglected or abused, obviously I would tell you, call someone like me. And again, and I say someone like me, it doesn't have to be me, but someone who does nursing home abuse work, and be very careful to ask them, you know, how much nursing home work have they done? Because a lot of people have this stuff on their website because they get the case and then they refer it to someone like me and I pay them a piece of it. But they're not really handling it. So make sure you ask the lawyer, you know, have you actually done this work, right? But outside of that, I think if someone dies because you suspect they were neglected in some way, the ombudsman is not typically where I would go for that. I would probably go to, the Office of Licensure at that point and get a formal investigation done.
Okay, all right. Let's see. How enforceable are signed admission arbitration clauses in cases with confirmed, either by state or federal regulatory agencies, cases of abuse or neglect? Okay, so how enforced, well, first off, what are signed admission arbitration clauses?
Yeah. So upon admission, typically, now this depends on whether your resident is competent or not, which becomes a big issue in these arbitration clauses. First of all, an arbitration clause is simply an agreement that if you and I get into a dispute, we are going to choose to arbitrate the case rather than put it into the court system. So what we're going to do is we're going to hire an arbitration company or a retired judge or somebody, and they'll hear our arguments and they'll decide, instead of a jury and a judge and the government system. And the thought behind arbitration, at least the proposed thought behind it, is that it's cheaper than a full-blown multi-year litigation. But here's the thing, and I want you to think about this. If a nursing home has an arbitration agreement in every single resident agreement, so everyone who comes in signs an arbitration agreement that says, we won't go to court if we get into a disagreement, we will instead go to arbitration. And the same arbitrator gets all of the arbitrations for this nursing home. How often is that arbitrator going to rule against this nursing home? Because they're getting paid by the hour to arbitrate those cases. And so if they lose you, you're one person. But if they lose the nursing home, they lose all of those businesses, all of those cases. So it's just built in badly for the person suing. And also, I'll tell you,
is that a real scenario where?
Oh yeah. No, I've been fighting arbitration agreements as much as I've been fighting nursing homes. So I brought up arbitration agreements will often, I'll tell you how bad it is. Most arbitration agreements in a nursing home, the nursing home has a clause that says the arbitration agreement only applies to the resident, or that the arbitration agreement does not apply to bill collection on behalf of the nursing home. So the nursing home wants to be able to sue you for its bill, but you can't sue it when you kill the resident. You have to go to arbitration of an arbitrator that's arbitrating three to five of these things a month for this nursing home at $500 an hour. It's just set up against you. So here's what you got to do. Here's what you got to know. And this is the most important thing. And I am working diligently right now to get this extended to assisted living facilities where I've seen even worse agreements. But in the nursing home context, the law is now that you cannot make a nursing home a pre-dispute arbitration clause a condition of admission, which means they cannot say to you, sign it or you can't come here, which is what they used to do. Now it's got to say it right on the front of the document. It's got to say you do not have to sign this, and it cannot be made a condition. And if someone says to you, well, we're not going to let you stay here if you don't sign that, immediately you can call me, you can call the APS, you can call licensure, and because that's a problem. In assisted living facilities, though, they actually can still make it a contingent on admission, which basically makes it a contract of adhesion, in my opinion, which means you can defend it by saying, I had no choice but to sign it, even though I disagreed with it. But that's not a great, that's not the argument you want to make. What you want to do in a nursing home context is draw a big X, write your initial, and say, I don't want to sign this, right? As far as enforceability, which I think was the original question, it really depends on who's signing it, what capacity are they signing it in. So if the daughter signs it for the resident and signs it as the resident's representative, and she does not have power of attorney or guardianship, in other words, she does not have agency to bind that resident to contract, then you can defeat that, right? If the resident signs it, but the resident is admitted with a dementia diagnosis, and it's pretty obvious they were not competent when they signed it, regular contract rules apply to arbitration agreements, right? So anything that would be a way to defeat a contract for anything else, a credit card, a purchase of a car, can be used. I can't go buying a car necessarily for Steve, and then Steve gets the bill, right? I don't have authority to do that. Now, if Steve gives me power of attorney to buy a car, now my agency, as long as my agency is good, I can do that. It's the same thing with an arbitration agreement.
Okay.
But if you have questions, call me. If you have an arbitration agreement, I can tell you how it works.
And I put Joe's contact in there if you've got questions for him, but not a surprise. We got a pile of questions here. Joe, are you cool hanging on?
Oh yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Happy to answer
all these folks, and it's recorded, so just in case you have to jump off, but we're going to touch on all these. And Marianne mentions, and people can see this in chat, that ombudsman reps are volunteers and much travel and spend time at these communities. But due to COVID and the fact that this is a volunteer assignment, they're always looking for ombudsmen. And early in my career, I volunteered as an ombudsman to get to understand this system a little bit better. And it was a very rewarding volunteer job. So thank you, Marianne, and for putting in a plug there. Okay, somebody asks, private facilities don't seem to operate or answer questions like standard skilled nursing facilities and rehabs. Finding many market as memory care, but are not. Finding that many market as memory care, but are not. When a person declines, they cannot meet their needs, they move them to another facility. If someone is private pay for 23 years and runs out of money, even if they paid as a buy-in, the child who signed as a guarantee is the child who signed as a guarantee or stuck. So I guess this is a whole nother area here where I guess there's some agreements where a child could be viewed as a guarantor. And is the scope of business?
Yeah, so in my experience, I want to be careful because this is a little outside of my wheelhouse, but I will say that in my experience, I have seen a lot of times when nursing homes, for example, try to send a bill to the next of kin after a resident dies. And I always tell them, well, and they call me and they go, I got a $20,000 bill because I guess mom died halfway through the month. And I go, okay, but are they claiming against your mom's assets or yours? And they go, well, mom doesn't have any assets. And I go, well, who's going to pay this then? And they go, well, I think they're asking me to. I'm not aware of any reason in the world why a child would have to pay the debt of mom out of anything other than mom's assets. Now, as far as being a guarantor, federal regulations governing nursing homes, I believe, prohibit, now again, I don't think this applies to assisted living facilities or memory care units, but if memory serves, and I haven't had this, but I could look it up, but I think OBRA regulations prohibit requiring a child guarantor for a resident. Now, of course, nursing homes can discharge for failure to pay, like any other business, like a hotel would. Now, there's rules. They can't just throw them out on 1 day's notice. There's got to be 30 days notice, the right to an appeal, but they actually don't have to, provide care for free.
Yeah. Okay, great. Let's see. A distant relative is in a mental health facility in Pennsylvania. How are these facilities regulated, and who should one talk to about this person receiving proper care?
So mental health facilities are a little different. They're not, and again, I don't know specifically what kind of facility your friend is in. A mental health facility, when you say it, sounds like a mental hospital. Mental hospitals, psychiatric wards in hospitals outside of nursing homes are typically treated like any other hospital. So the licensing agency that governs the licensure of hospitals likely governs psychiatric hospitals as well. Getting care is likely very similar. I don't think the OBRA regulations under OBRA 87 governing skilled nursing facilities applies, but I'm quite sure that mental health hospitals have regulations that are similar because they do accept Medicare. And as far as getting the care that you want from them, it's the same thing. It's going to be Adult Protective Services, the licensing agency that licenses that facility in Pennsylvania. And the only difference is, I don't know if I would call a nursing home abuse or neglect attorney. If you called me with a mental health facility negligence case, I would probably refer you to a medical malpractice attorney, which handles more hospitals and doctors than I do.
Now, someone has a question that can you refer, do you have somebody that handles cases like these in North Carolina, but is there sort of an overarching association that your type of practice is a member of?
So I'm a member of just about every nursing home abuse litigation group you can be. I am the immediate past president of the Virginia Trial Lawyers Nursing Home Litigation Group. I am the chair of the mentorship committee of the AAJ Nursing Home Litigation Group, which is the largest national lawyers group for nursing home residents. And I'm a member of something called Base Camp, which is the top 100 nursing home lawyers in America. So the quick answer to that specific question is Karma Henson, Henson, in North Carolina. Google Karma Henson, she'll come right up at Henson and Forst, I think it is, but Karma Henson. And please tell her Joe Musso sent you. But she's the best of the best in North Carolina. I know, because I'm in that group with the 100 best nursing home lawyers in America, I know. If you ever need a nursing home lawyer and it's not in Virginia, Maryland, or DC, I will tell you that I can find the place for you. I am also of counsel to Bedsore Law, which is the biggest nursing home law firm in America that I'm aware of. They practice in just about every state. And so again, you could contact me and I would definitely be able to get you in the hands of the right people.
Great. I'm going to drop your contact info in there for anybody outside of the DC.
Do me a favor, do me one quick favor. So I think I told you I just started my law firm.
Yep.
That phone number has actually changed. So let me give you a better one.
Okay.
703-982-6755. Great. And you can get the office one that Steve's got is fine, but it'll take longer to get to me. You can come right to me at joe@mussolawfirm.com.
Okay, I'll drop that in there, and we are good to go there. And let's see, we've got somebody that says Joe is squarely on the bullseye on all the issues that we faced with our aging parents as they move through the system from independent to assisted to memory care. Very well done. Let's see, who is the question here, who is the chain in command if you feel a nursing home administrator is not resolving the issues at the facility level?
So that's just such a great question, and it kind of leads into something that I think is really important in advocacy. I always teach I think I told you, Steve, off before we started, that I have had for a long time this idea of empowered caregiving, and I have an empowered caregiver journal and kind of a guidebook that I'm happy to share with anyone who wants it. And in that book, one of the things I say is you have to know how to climb the ladder, right? You don't want to be asking the janitor when your mother last ate, right? I mean, that sounds silly. If you went into a daycare center, you wouldn't want to ask the receptionist when your kids started, throwing up with the norovirus, right? You'd want to ask, who was the teacher in the room when my son got hurt, right? So you have to know the hierarchy, and you take your complaints, because remember, it's a job to them, it's a business to the owners, it's a job to the staff, right? So when you're thinking about the job, you're always thinking, who is this person's supervisor, right? So you go to a CNA, a certified nurse aide, who maybe is the one who just changed your mom, or supposed to give the bed bath to mom, or get the take her to the toilet. And you ask her, why was mom found on the floor? Why does mom have this bruise? If you don't get satisfaction, you got to know the charge nurse is her supervisor, right? And then if the charge nurse can't give you answers, then the unit manager is the next. And again, I can teach you all of this, but you need to go and ask, who is above you? Who is above? When you're on admission in that day, you should ask, is there an org chart? Is there a chain of command here? How do I get? So if I have a care problem, I wouldn't start with the administrator. I mean, here's the reality of most administrators. They are business people who are trying to keep the census full, the number of beds full, make sure that they're reporting and have regulatory compliance. If I have a care question and I've gone to my aide and I've gone to my direct nurse who's on, assigned to my resident, and I've gone to her boss, the unit manager, I'm going to the director of nursing, okay? Because she's the chief clinical officer in the building. The administrator is going to probably brush you off, or going to say, let me find out, and he's going to go to the director of nursing. So you go to the director of nursing. But if you can't get satisfaction going all the way up to the administrator, if you've gone all those rungs and the administrator now is the last stop, maybe the stop next to it is called the medical director, which is the physician that's charged with the medical care of the entire facility. Other than that, the next step is the governing body. That's the ownership, and they never know what's going on, especially if they own more than one. At that point, you're calling someone like me, or you're calling APS, or you're calling an ombudsman, or you're calling the licensing agency that licensed the facility type that you're in. So social services if it's assisted living, Department of Health if it's nursing home. The administrator is about as high as you can go on that hierarchy.
Okay, let's see. Another one here. Just a minor note: on a brief visit to a nursing home locally, and after visiting and leaving, I could not find any staff to show me the way out. It seems minor. Would just a letter to the administrator pointing this out suffice? And I had a similar situation, and I don't know if this person's situation was on a weekend, and
weekends are always worse,
where I couldn't get it was a secure community and I couldn't get out. And but what, when you find little, and I don't want to call that a little thing, but when you find things like that, what would be the if you're visiting and you see something like this, what's the most effective way to communicate?
Now, this will be the third time I say this, so it's going to be, I'm getting the mantra, which is what I want my empowered caregivers to have, right? It's a job for the staff. It's a business for the owners. So let's think about, when we're advocating, we don't think about, well, it's easy for us to go, this is what I want, right? If you've ever dealt with a toddler that's mine, and they're not paying attention, right? If you don't think about what that kid wants and what that kid wants to avoid, maybe a smack, right? Or getting grounded, or a timeout, or their thing taken away, whatever their thing is, right? We think about what moves the person we're trying to advocate to. If I don't care what they put on their website, the nurse doesn't care about your mom the way you do. The business does not care about your mom the way you do. Let's just be real about that, right? Let's not give into the fictions of the marketing. So let's be straight. What does the nurse and the aide care about? They care about their job. They don't want to get fired. They don't want to get disciplined. They don't want to get docked. They don't want to get suspended without pay. They don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to have to go get their resume out and go look for a new job. And you can be just pain enough in the ass to make something like that happen, which is why they don't want to tell you their name. They don't want to answer your question. They don't want you going to their boss. They don't want you to know who their boss is. So if you are somebody who says, what is your name? What is your title? Who is your boss? I want to know. That's going to make people agitated. It's going to make people stand up a bit. If you then offer them an alternative, like, or you can tell me who I have to talk to about the staffing level in this facility. They may want to help you more, right? The people who work there, what they're worried about is getting in trouble. And the people who own the building, what they're worried about is me. What they're worried about is the Office of Licensure citing them, fining them, giving them deficiencies, potentially closing off new admissions, or like me, suing them and dragging them through 3 years of litigation where they got to pay a lawyer $400 an hour to fight with me and then pay us at the end of it when we win. So really long-winded way of saying, and I say this all the time, and I think there are probably letters all over the country right now with my name on them. If you want to get someone's attention, by all means, everyone who's listening, you're free to do this. Send the letter and at the bottom put CC Joe Musso Esquire, because they're going to Google that name. That name's going to lead to a nursing home abuse attorney of 25 years. So if you want to do that, go ahead and do that. But yeah, you want to put it, I'm a big believer of put it in writing. An email to the administrator that says, I'm placing you on notice that I asked to be let out and I could not find a staff member anywhere on your floor. CC Joe Musso, CC Office of Licensure, whatever, you know, now that guy goes, uh-oh, this is like exhibit A. There was nobody here to show this lady out. Someone's head's going to roll. What's going to happen is that administrator is going to send a letter, you know, and go to the DON and go, what is going on the unit? I shouldn't be getting emails from residents' families saying, you know, CC to some nursing home lawyer and the Office of the Ombudsman and APS and the Office of Healthcare Quality in Maryland or the Department of Health in DC or Virginia. I don't want this on my desk. Now the DON goes to the LPNs and where were you guys? Mm-hmm. Why is this, you know, she asked for to be, where were you? That's how you do it. It's think about them. What do they want? It's their job and it's their business.
Yeah, man. So now, Marianne, who's an ombudsman, and she had this here for everybody to read, but I want to read this, is the ombudsmen are advocates for the resident. They work with families, but their role is helping residents advocate for themselves or advocating for them, always with the residents' consent. And I think this is also, overall, this is a big reminder for all of us when we're in this situation, is that a lot of times we need to reflect on what we want as a loved one and what mom wants, and we need to be thinking about and communicating with the resident if we're able to communicate with them, and if we're not, hopefully we have the proper legal paperwork so that we can advocate for them as well.
My only pushback, and Marianne's 100% right, but my only pushback on the overarching theme there is be real wary of, well, mom's refusing. Okay, I get a lot of dad's refusing, dad won't eat, dad's refusing to eat, dad's refusing to bathe, dad's refusing to let me change his diaper, dad won't let us turn and reposition him. You should be taking that real seriously when you start hearing that. That is a strong defense by these nursing homes. They document that better than they document anything else. The question should be, what are we doing to address the refusal? Of course, I don't mean make dad do something he doesn't want, but does dad need a psych eval? Does dad need his medications checked by the doctor? Why is dad suddenly not eating? Is dad sick in some way? Does he have pain somewhere? You know, if your father is not somebody who typically is refusing care, and all of a sudden you start catching dad in a dirty diaper 3 shifts in a row, and they tell you the reason why is he won't let us change him, You should not just take that as gospel. You should challenge that and go, well, let's get a doctor in here to evaluate why that's happening.
Mhm. Which is what we would do if our child was, and not, I'm not trying to compare our parents with our children,
Oh, but it's
but
a good
those of
point.
you who are parents would never let, I mean, shoot, those of us who are parents, especially first-time parents, your kid's not going to sit for 3 minutes in a dirty diaper. So
Imagine people coming into a daycare center, Steve, to pick up Johnny, and Johnny comes out and he's got a huge giant gash on his forehead and a bruise under his eye. And when they say, what happened? The person says, I don't know.
yeah, no, that
We would never, ever allow that. But I'm telling you, this happens every single day in our nursing homes. And I understand what you're worried about by saying, you know, I don't want to say they're children, but they're as vulnerable, if not more so, than children.
Yeah.
And, you know, a daycare center lets a kid get outside and gets hit by a bus, they're going to pay $20 million for it. But if the same thing happens to a 90-year-old who's got dementia, they're trying to settle that case for 200 grand and asking, why is everyone so up in arms about it? And people like me, and I think a lot of people on this call feel differently about that.
Yeah. So, holy cow, this, I mean, number one, this is eye-opening, okay, that this is going on, because most of the people that I know, most of the providers and myself, that we're all about innovative care and coming up with ways to do a better job in this space. And when you surround yourself with pioneers like that, you begin to think that everybody thinks this way. But I think that, you know, firsthand that this is not necessarily true, that there are calls that still come in, and the statistics show that there are issues of abuse and neglect that are out there. So we've got a request. Can Joe come back and do this again?
The short answer is I would come back as many times as you'd like. If you Google, again, you Google my name in nursing home, there are videos, some of them an hour or two long, spanning my career, talking about all of these issues. One of the ones that's most popular is the lessons from 20 years as a nursing home abuse lawyer. That's a video that's out there. You can call me, email me. I mean, this is my life. I've been doing this for 25 years. And again, you don't do this work if you're not a real believer. There's easier ways for me to make a living. I could be suing over car accidents, right? And making more money. I do this job because I believe in what I'm doing, and I'm looking at it over a career and going, what kind of impact can I really have? So actually, reach out.
The person that asked that question, I was going to say, what's the book that you put together?
The Empowered Caregiver. I'm happy to send you a copy of it.
But send me a copy, and
sure.
And then what I'd like to do, I'm going to schedule you again, and let's we can continue this conversation, and then also go through that book, because I think you told me the genesis of writing that book was everything that you have seen as this nursing home abuse attorney prompted you to write this book, to give people suggestions on how they can avoid hiring you. And so folks, I'm going to get him on the schedule as quickly as we can here. But let's see, getting a lot of great feedback. Everybody really enjoyed this presentation. And I also, just as a reminder, I mean, there are great providers out there. Like, don't throw this industry, don't throw a blanket over this industry that because of the folks that we've been talking about. Be a vocal and cautious consumer, ask the questions, do the things that Joe was saying, to be that squeaky wheel. And but let's keep this dialogue going.
Let me add that you should be catching people doing things right. Remember, just same way I said, it's their job, it's their business. If they're doing something right, encourage that. It's not just let me catch you doing something wrong. Imagine if you were an aide doing that thankless job, and
Yep.
someone comes to you and says, hey, you know, my mom looks so clean and so happy this morning, and I know you took care of her. Thank you so much. You know, and here's a Starbucks gift card. Like, I encourage you should be catching people doing things right.
Oh, you know, this is a great positive way to sort of wrap this discussion up, is that you're dead on, is that if your loved one is in a caregiving situation, make sure that even if you're going through some challenging time, when you see caregivers that are there that are doing a great job, commend them on that. And I got a little story that I always love to tell, is that my buddy's grandmother was in a nursing home, and his mom endeared herself to this one caregiver. He didn't work all the shifts, he was working there part-time, and she found out that he was taking 2 buses to get to this job. She by talking to some of his coworkers, I know this is back in the olden days, she found out where he lived. And one morning she picked him up with a cup of coffee and a donut, said, get in, I'm driving you to work, you don't need to take the bus today. And I will tell you, she will tell you that that was a 5-star facility after that experience, is that just that little bit of attention and having that extra person to advocate for you can make a huge difference.
Right. They should be treating you as a family member or as an advocate, as a team member, and you should be treating them as a team member. Like I said, be nice until you have to not be nice, but you should assume that they're trying as hard as they can, and you should be a part of advocating for them. If they're not getting enough staff and enough support, sometimes the best way to deal with it is go to the DON and go, I think your nurses are not getting enough help. Now you're actually trying to help their job situation. But we can talk about this more. I would love to come on again and really focus on the empowered caregiver stuff, so that we can prevent more of this, rather than just me show you terrible pictures of what I deal with every day.
Well, I'll shoot you an email, but here, let me just do one last question that came in. My husband was accidentally dumped on his head and got a concussion requiring hospitalization. He got a UTI, he got pneumonia, his feeding tube was accidentally pulled out. Do I have a legal case worth pursuing?
Answer is certainly you potentially have a claim. Those things sound like deviations from the standard of care. The longer answer is it depends, and a lot of it comes down to whether or not the case's value is sufficient to cover all of those expenses, the fees, the costs, the experts. Unfortunately, most of the cases I take are wrongful death cases where there's clear negligence and clear liability that clearly caused the death, because I can spend $100,000 pursuing one of these cases before attorney's fees, and
wow,
a $50,000 resolution on $100,000 spent. Nobody's happy with me.
man. Yeah, there's clearly, I mean, this speaks to the value of the ombudsman out there.
Absolutely.
There's clearly not a huge litigating legal framework to catch and penalize problems. You know,
I told you earlier, Steve, that 97 out of 100 phone calls I will not be able to help. And what I should have told you and been clear about was that's not because 97 of them don't have a real case. You know, 90 of them probably have something that was truly done wrong. It's just the legal system and the costs of the case make it impossible to pursue it. So there's a gigantic gap that these volunteer, to Mary Ann's point, these wonderful volunteer people are taking up, that lawyers like me that have all these financial considerations can't fix.
Wow. All right. Hour and 20 minutes. I think this is a record for 2023. Thanks a lot, Joe. Thanks to everybody. I hope this was helpful, and we will be seeing you soon.
Take care.